Circle 8.
Circle 8.
Circle 8.
Welcome to Circle 8. The development of personality. According to Freud, childhood sexuality plays an important role in the development of the personality. Franscher, 1973. The infant is capable of receiving sexual gratification from rhythmic stimulation of any part of the body. Freud termed this conception polymorphous perversity. As the infant matures, the generalized ability to receive sexual gratification decreases as certain parts of the body becomes preferred sites of gratification. The possibilities for gratification of sexual instinct narrows as the infant develops. Freud postulated a series of developmental stages that describe this narrowing process of sexual gratification and are now referred to as the stages of psychosexual development. The stages are described as follows. Oral stage. The oral stage occurs during the first year of life and develops from feeding activity by the infant, in which the mouth and the lips naturally come to receive more stimulation than the other parts of the body. Because of oral responses had been demonstrated to take on strong sexual connotations in perversions, neurosis, and latent dream content. Freud thought that the non-nutritive components of an infant's behavior were sexual in nature. Oral memories have a central position in the psychological life of the infant, and the new experiences are organized around these memories. Franscher, 1973. Freud proposed that the mouth has 5 modes of functioning. 1. Taking in. 2. Holding on. 3. Biting. 4. Spitting out. And 5. Closing. Each of these modes is a prototype of certain personality traits. These functions take on symbolic meaning in the later adaptations the individual makes in coping with anxieties and stresses of life. For example, taking in through the mouth is the prototype for acquisitiveness, holding for tenacity, and spitting out for rejection. Whether these traits become part of one's personality depends on the amount of anxiety and frustration that was experienced in the prototype mode of the oral stage. For example, an infant who was weaned too soon or too abruptly may later develop a strong tendency to be possessive in order to avoid the repetition of the anxiety and frustration of the weaning experience. Hall, 1954. Anal stage. The anal stage occurs during the second and third years of life and develops with maturation as the anal area begins to assume as the central position in the child's sexual development. This area becomes more strongly associated with sexual gratification than the mouth. As the child matures and becomes capable of voluntary muscle control and eventual bowel control, the child discovers that sexual stimulation occurs from voluntary retaining and expelling feces. Anal ideas and memories involve such activities as elimination, retention, smearing, or cleaning. Just as with the oral stage, the prototype of later personality characteristics develop during the anal stage. For example, expulsive elimination is the prototype of emotional outburst and temper tantrums in later life. Toilet training, which usually occurs during this time, can have the effect of establishing prototypes for later conflicts with authority figures, meticulous cleanliness and orderliness, or even generosity and philanthropy. Hall, 1954. Phallic stage. This stage occurs after mastering the task of toilet training. At approximately ages 3 and 4, another shift of the zone of sexual stimulation takes place. This occurs when the child discovers the pleasures of genital manipulation. Because of the maturational development of increased dexterity, The child can now have regular and intense pleasure by stimulating the genitals. It is during this stage that the Oedipus complex develops. Freud named this stage for the parallels it had with the Greek play Oedipus Rex, in which Oedipus kills his father and marries his mother. The Oedipus complex develops when the child has intense sexual feelings for the parents of the opposite sex. The male child fears castration from the powerful father and subsequently represses his desires for the mother and identifies with the father. The female child thinks she has already been castrated and thus suffers from penis envy and is not as fearful of her mother as the male is of his father. If there are difficulties in the resolution of the Oedipus complex, later sexual identity problems may occur, resulting in homosexual behavior. Francher, 1973, Hall, 1954. Latency period. These first three stages comprise what is called the pregenital stages. Fixation at any one of these stages may produce oral, anal, or phallic character types in later life. These stages are precursors to the fourth stage of psychosexual development, the latency period, which extends from age 5 or 6 to puberty. At about age 6, the sexual instinct diminishes and the child enters a stage of sexual quiescence. During this stage, the child enters school and applies self to the task of learning. During this stage, the child enters school and applies self to the task of learning. Although the sexual instinct is repressed, the sexualized memories of the previous stage are still intact and will influence future personality development. Francher, 1973, Hall, 1954. Genital stage. The fifth stage of psychosexual development. The genital stage occurs at puberty and is characterized by non-narcissistic behavior that develops in the direction of biological reproduction. Characteristics of this stage are an attraction for the opposite sex, socialization and group activities, marriage and establishing a family, and vocational development. The genital stage becomes fused with the pregenital stages as kissing, caressing, sexual intercourse, satisfying pregenital impulses. This stage lasts from puberty to death or senility, whichever comes first. Francher, 1973, Hall, 1954. In summary, Freud emphasized the role of sexuality in the development of personality. The narrowing manifestation of sexuality proceed through 5 psychosexual stages of development. As the developing person proceeds through these stages, propelled by inherent forces and molded through environmental influences, various components of personality are required. Fixation at any of these first 3 stages may produce certain personality character types in later life, such as the oral, anal, or phallic character. Although there are 2 further stages of psychosexual development, the basis for the individual's personality in later life is determined during the first 3 stages. Nature of maladjustment. The basic theme of Freudian psychology is that the process of human development requires the suppression of impure childish impulses. Adults continue to fight the battle against these antisocial and disruptive impulses. In Freud's time, a common manifestation of the attempt to repress these loathsome childhood wishes was hysteria. It was through Freud's work with hysterical clients that he discovered the relationship between sexual material and hysterical symptoms. He first thought that childhood seduction and sexual trauma were the cause of the hysterical symptoms, but eventually proposed that the memories his clients produced were the products of wish fulfillment rather than traumatic events. Through self-analysis, he found traces of childhood sexuality in himself. From these observations, he concluded that the unsuccessful resolution of the Oedipus complex was responsible for neurotic symptoms. Francher, 1973. Basically, what precipitates the neurosis is that the impulses of the Oedipus complex have strong drives propelling them towards satisfaction. Most persons are able to satisfactorily resolve these impulses. The most common and significant conflicts arise from wishes during the Oedipal phase. Childhood neuroses are usually manifested through nightmares, phobias, tics, mannerism, ritualistic behaviors, and general apprehensiveness. The childhood behavior disorders are generally related to repressed neuroses. Adult neurosis is generally interpreted as a resurfacing of childhood neurosis. Arlo, 1979. Regarding psychosis, Freud proposed that the psychic processes in neurosis and psychosis had a fundamental unity, just as the symptoms of the neurotic client and the dreams of the normal person make sense in terms of the unconscious wishes that gives rise to them. The symptoms of the psychotic are explainable by the same mental processes. However, the principal feature of psychosis that differentiates it from neurosis is the change in the psychotic's relationship with the people and the environment. The psychotic withdraws from the world and the people, often thinking that the world has changed and that people are unreal. Thus, the psychotic has a break with reality that is different from the characteristics of the neurotic and the normal. Arlo and Brenner, 1964. Major concepts. Psychoanalytic theory embodies a host of formulations, assumptions, and concepts. The major Freudian concepts that we will mention are the unconscious, instincts, identification, displacement, Freudian symbol, defense mechanism, transference, and free association. The unconscious. According to Freud, the unconscious is an actual entity of the mind. In his topographic concept of the mind, the unconscious comprises the lowest of the three layers. The preconscious is the middle of the layer, and the conscious is the upper layer. Woolman, 1968. The mental phenomena of these three layers of the mind vary in their degree of availability to conscious awareness. Some of the mental or emotional products are readily accessible to conscious awareness because resistance to their expression is weak. However, other mental or emotional products are not available to conscious awareness except through the process of psychoanalysis. These unconscious ideas, memories, and thoughts vary in their availability to awareness from the slip of the tongue material in the preconscious to those submerged in unconscious during the child's pre-language stage. Hall, 1954. What seems most important about unconscious material is the influence it exerts on the behavior of the consciously unaware individual. This influence on behavior ranges from forgetfulness, slips of the tongue, and accidents to neurosis manifested in hysterical symptoms. Freud explains the idea of an unconscious, that material unavailable to awareness in terms of incompatibility, is between certain unacceptable ideas which undergo repression and a mental agency, the ego, which exerts the repression. Olheim, 1971. Instincts. According to Freud, instincts are organic motivational forces or drives. Woolman, 1968. Freud recognizes two classes of instincts, the life and death instincts, and the labels the life instinct, libido, and the death instincts, thanatos. The seat of the instincts is the id, the original source of psychic energy. Instincts impart direction to psychological processes and function as the motivational forces in people. Each instinct has a source of energy, an aim, a removal of need, an object, food, and an impetus, strength. Hall, 1954. Identification. Identification is an ego mechanism that is important in personality development. One form of identification is the incorporation of the qualities of another person into one's personality. There are four types of identification. Number one, narcissistic identification is identification with other persons who possess the same traits as the identifier, such as athletic ability. Number two, goal-oriented identification is identifying with someone who has a trait the identifier does not possess in hopes of acquiring that trait, such as a male child wanting to be strong like his father. Number three, object loss identification occurs when someone attempts to regain or secure a lost object by identifying with the object, such as the child who tries to regain or secure parental love through attempts to please the parents by adopting their values and standards. Number four, authority identification is identifying with the prohibition set down by parents and other authority figures. This type of identification leads to the development of the conscience. Hall, 1954. Displacement, the process by which psychic energy from the instincts can be rechanneled from one object to another, is displacement. In this process, only the object of the instinct varies, and the source and the aim of the instinct remains the same. Through this process of object substitution, displacement, a major portion of the personality is formed. The development of the personality through the mechanism of displacement is a complex process by which multiple tensions can be reduced, and the object choice may be far removed from the instinctual drive that started the process. For example, the original drive for oral gratification, which is first satisfied by sucking the nipple, will undergo several displacements, i.e., thumb sucking, candy sucking, cigarette smoking, beer drinking, eating, talking, oratory, etc. Hall, 1954. Freudian symbol. The Freudian symbol is a socially acceptable representation, usually in dreams, of an unconscious and objectionable thought, wish, or object. Through the process of displacement, objects that are unacceptable to direct representations, such as the penis, appear in dreams as elongated objects or objects capable of penetration. Example, knives, guns, snakes, statues, spires, cigars, etc. The vagina is represented by objects capable of being receptacles such as caves, boxes, tunnels, pockets, etc. In psychoanalytic treatment, the symbols in dreams that may represent a wide range of unconscious thoughts are analyzed and used as a means to make unconscious material conscious. Hall, 1954. Defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms are techniques used by the ego to reduce anxiety associated with situations and feelings that pose a threat through the person. This anxiety is generated by the instinctual demands of the id and the pressures of the superego. Reduction of anxiety may be accomplished by realistic measures designed to deal directly with the source of the threat, or by the use of defense mechanisms that to a greater or lesser degree distort, deny, or falsify reality of the anxiety-producing situation. These mechanisms are protective devices used by most people and at times in the person's life, particularly when the ego is developing. Prevent the person from being overwhelmed by parental and social demands. When demands made on the person are so excessive that the defense mechanisms must be employed extensively enough to thwart the natural developmental process of the person, the defense mechanism become unhealthy and growth retarding. Some of the more important defense mechanisms are described. Woolman, 1968. Number 1. Repression. Repression forces a threatening memory, thought, or perception out of consciousness and prevents it from returning to consciousness. Repression may prevent a person from seeing an object that is actually in view, or it may allow distortion of objective reality in order to protect the ego from the dangers associated with the perception. Repression works similarly with threatening memories and thoughts. Freud attributed hysterical disorders to the mechanisms of repression. Repression may be contributed to the formation of a conversion reaction resulting in so-called psychosomatic disorders such as asthma, arthritis, and ulcers. Repressed materials may also find expression in a disguised form through the mechanism of displacement. Repressed desires may find symbolic fulfillment in dreams or manifest themselves in accidents and foolish mistakes. Hall, 1954. Projection. Sometimes when a person feels the pressure of threatening forces from id or superego, the ego attributes the threatening material to an external source. For example, one who is feeling hostile towards another person may turn his feelings into, "He is feeling hostile towards me." In this instance, the ego is attempting to convert the feelings of internal anxiety into an objective external anxiety that is easier to handle. Another type of projection is the attribution of one's feelings or characteristics to people in general. For example, if one is unhappily married, the anxiety associated with the condition may be reduced by concluding that all marriages are unhappy. Hall, 1954. Reaction formation. Reaction formation occurs when an impulse threatens the ego and the ego sidetracks the expression of the impulse by behaving in an opposite way. For example, a person who crusades against vice and corruption may be doing so, and consciously, to deny feelings and urges to participate in these same activities. The principal features of reaction formation are an exaggerated or affected demonstration of the opposite feeling and an inflexibility of expression of that feeling. That expression of emotion does not adapt to changing situations but is compulsively expressed to prevent expression of the real feeling. Reaction formations are also employed against external threats, such as an exaggerated friendliness toward or obedience to someone or something that is feared. Hall, 1954. Fixation. Fixation describes a psychological stunting of growth whereby a person fails to proceed from one developmental stage to another. An example of this is becoming fixated in the childhood stage of development and failure to proceed into the adolescent stage of development. People generally experience anxiety when faced with the prospect of engaging in a new behavior because of insecurity about performing adequately, being ridiculed for failure, or fear of punishment. Most people will take the risk in order to grow. However, for some, the anxiety produced by the thought of the anticipated situation may be so great that the person refuses to engage in the new behavior and thus remains fixated at an earlier developmental level. This fixation is called separation anxiety, a fear of leaving the old for the new. Hall, 1954. Regression. Regression is a retreat to a previous stage of development after having reached an advanced stage. An example of regressive behavior is the college freshman who returns to the security of the parents' home every weekend, or perhaps drops out of school altogether rather than face the anxiety of facing the world alone. A more severe expression of regressive behavior would be for a person to withdraw into a world of daydreams and fantasies, to the exclusion of functioning independently in society. Hall, 1954. Transference. Transference, a key concept in psychoanalytic therapy, occurs when the client's emotional feelings are directed towards the therapist, as though the therapist were the original source of the emotional feelings. The therapist's analysis assists the client to distinguish between the fantasy and the reality of the feelings transferred from some previous significant person to the therapist. Arlo, 1979. Also, the client is helped to gain an understanding of how he or she misperceives misinterprets, or misresponds to the present in terms of the past. Since most of the transference material is unconscious, the therapeutic skill of the therapist is needed to help the client realign these distorted relationships. Free association. Free association is the technique developed by Freud which encourages the client to report to the therapist whatever enters the conscious mind without bias or criticism. Such report enables the therapist to uncover repressed material. The analysis of hidden conflicts helps the client gain insight that is core of the growth process. Fine, 1973.